Previously on AfroKorean Timeless Stories.
A waitress refused a mafia boss's money and told him the truth. He hired her. She came into his house, hunting the man who destroyed her family 8 years ago, and the trail led straight to him. But the truth was worse and stranger than her grief. He had not killed her family. He had saved her from the fire, a boy of 18 who disobeyed the only order that mattered, and carried the scar for it ever since. The old man came for the door he opened. In a dead shipping yard in the rain, Cho Man-soo fell, and so did Kang, with Amara's hands pressed to the wound and 4 unfinished words dying on his lips. She sat in a hospital corridor for 6 hours, and at 6 minutes past 10, a surgeon came through the doors with something she needed to know first, something that had nothing to do with the surgery, and everything to do with a name on his file that should not exist. And that is where we begin. The surgeon stopped in front of her and told her Kang had survived. He said the word survived, and Amara's legs nearly went out from under her, and Zuri caught her arm, and for one clean bright second the whole world was going to be all right. Then the surgeon's face did something careful. He said there was a complication, not in the operating room, in the paperwork. He asked her, very quietly, whether she knew that the man she came in with had been legally dead for 8 years. Amara heard the words and could not make them fit together. They had run his blood, his records, everything the law required before they opened a man up, and the national database had thrown back a flag no one could explain. A death certificate, 8 years old, filed, sealed, and never questioned. The man breathing behind those doors, the man who ran half the shadows in this city, did not legally exist. On paper, he had died the same winter Amara's family did. She understood, standing in that corridor, that Cho Man-soo had not just scarred a boy that morning. He had erased him. They let her see him near dawn. He was smaller in the bed than she had ever seen him, stripped of the suit and the authority and the cold, just a man with tubes in his arm and a machine counting his heartbeats out loud. She sat in the chair beside him, and she did not take his hand, because she was still learning what her hands were allowed to do now that everything she had believed had been rearranged. His eyes opened at the gray edge of morning. He looked at her, and the first thing he did was try to apologize. She told him not to. She told him that a man who had just been cut open did not get to spend his first words saying sorry. So he said the 4 words instead, the ones he had run out of blood to finish in the warehouse. He said them plainly, looking straight at her, with nothing left to hide behind and no empire in the room to protect him. And Amara felt them land somewhere very deep and very old, in a place that had held nothing but grief for 8 years. Then a nurse came in, and the moment folded shut, and outside in the world his empire was already tearing itself apart. Cho Man-soo was gone, and everyone had expected the empire to simply fall into Kang's hands. It did not. An old man's death does not settle a kingdom. It opens one. Within days, the careful structure Cho Man-soo had held together for 40 years began to come apart at every seam, because the thing that had kept 100 dangerous men in line was not love, and it was not law. It was fear of one specific person, and that person was now Ash. The allies who had quietly walked away in Kang's final week began, just as quietly, to walk back. Not all of them to kneel. Hyun-sik came to the room with his arm in a sling and a list of names in his head. He had taken a bullet in the warehouse and refused to stay in his own bed, and now he stood at the foot of his bosses and laid it out. The accounts were being probed. 2 territories had gone dark, and a name he had not spoken aloud in 15 years had begun moving through the organization like a cold current, a man everyone had assumed retired, a man who had served Cho Man-soo longer and more faithfully than Kang ever had. Kang closed his eyes. He said the name before Hyun-sik could. Yoon Seo-jin. Yoon Seo-jin had waited 20 years for a morning like this one. He had been Cho Man-soo's finest instrument, the true believer, the one who understood the organization not as a business but as a bloodline, a thing to be protected and passed down clean. And he had watched the old man pass him over for a scarred, disobedient boy, kept on a leash precisely because he could be owned. Yoon had never forgiven it. He had simply outlasted it. Now the boy was in a hospital bed with no name and no papers and a fatal new weakness, and Yoon Seo-jin intended to be very patient and very thorough about all three. He signed himself out against every medical instruction 3 days later. Amara argued with him the entire time and lost, because a man who does not legally exist cannot afford to lie still in a building full of records and cameras. He put his shirt on over the bandage with his teeth gritted, and he told her the truth of his position in flat, plain words. Yoon Seo-jin would not come for him with guns. Yoon was cleverer than that. He would come for him with paper, with proof, with the one weapon a ghost cannot defend against, which is a public existence. And if this story has its hooks in you, do one small thing for the person telling it to you. Tap that subscribe button, not because anyone is demanding it, but because it tells this channel that the work behind stories like this is reaching the people it was built for. Every subscribe is a quiet signal that you want more. It is the only reason AfroKorean timeless stories can keep making worlds this rich and this dangerous for you. Now stay close, because the man hunting Kang is about to make his first move, and it does not land where anyone is looking. Yoon Seo-jin's first move was against Shin Bora. He knew what she had done. He knew the file that had unburied the old man's secret had her handwriting on it, and he understood, as a man who traded in leverage, that Bora was now the single most exposed person in the entire story. She had betrayed her own world to help a rival. There was a price on that, and you named it in a single quiet document delivered to her cold white apartment. Come back to the old guard, deliver Kang, and be forgiven. Refuse, and be erased the way Cho Man-soo erased inconvenient people. Bora read it twice. Then she did something that surprised even her. She brought the threat straight to Amara and put it in her hands. The woman who had once held an envelope full of Amara's secrets on a balcony now handed over the proof of her own death sentence, freely, and said she was done choosing the winning side. She had spent her whole life doing that, and it had made her nothing but a weapon other people pointed. She would rather be a person who lost with the right people than a person who kept winning alone. Amara looked at her for a long moment. Then she said the thing neither of them expected. She said thank you, and she meant it, and something between the two women quietly changed shape. Yoon Seo-jin called the old guard together in the hall where the organization had made its worst decisions for 2 generations. He did not shout. He never shouted. He simply laid out for the assembled heads what Kang Tae-oh actually was: a man with no legal name, no birth record, no existence the state would defend, a leader who could be made to vanish without a single crime being reported, because you cannot report the disappearance of someone who is already dead. He told them the empire deserved a real heir, a believer, himself, and one by one, the men who had feared Cho Man-soo began to nod. Hyun-sik walked into that hall uninvited with his arm in a sling and told the most powerful men in the city that they were cowards. He had served the organization for 20 years. He had earned the right to be heard even as he threw it away. He told them that Kang was the only leader who had ever tried to make this thing less monstrous than it was, that Yoon Seo-jin would take them straight back into the darkness they had all pretended to outgrow, and that the old man they were rushing to replace had died reaching for exactly that darkness. It changed nothing, but it put Hyun-sik on a list, and Yoon Seo-jin was a man who settled lists. And then Zuri Oko walked in, and she was not the same woman Yoon Seo-jin had ordered dragged into a warehouse. 18 hours tied to a chair had burned something soft out of her and left something very hard in its place. She was done being the friend who begged Amara to run, the bystander, the leverage. She dropped a laptop bag on the table and said she had spent 2 weeks doing the one thing none of these dangerous men had thought a kidnapped waitress's friend could do. She had followed the paper. If you are still with me, still in this fight with her, let me know you are here. Drop the one emoji that matches exactly how you feel right now, this second. Tell me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is where you are, because something tells me you should have been asleep by now. And if you're watching on your television, reach over and hit that like button so I know you are out there with us. Now watch what a woman nobody took seriously just found, because it turns the entire war on its head. Yoon Seo-jin had spent 20 years being untouchable. But every ghost has a body somewhere, and every believer keeps a shrine. Zuri had found the accounts Yoon used to fund his quiet takeover, and threaded through them, hidden under decades of clean shell companies, was the one thing the man could not afford to have seen. The same forgery machinery Cho Man-soo had used to erase Kang, Yoon Seo-jin had used to, years earlier, to erase himself. He was not the legitimate heir he claimed to be. He was another manufactured ghost, and he had built his entire claim to the throne on a lineage that did not exist. Kang looked at the screen, and for the first time in weeks, he almost smiled. He had the weapon now. He could destroy Yoon Seo-jin with it. And that was exactly where the real choice began. Because to use it, to expose Yoon and take the empire cleanly, Kang would have to step fully into the throne, claim the whole machine, and become the undisputed head of the very organization that had burned Amara's family alive. He would win. He would also become, in every way that counted, a new Cho Man-soo. The scar boy who once went through a door to save people would spend the rest of his life as the man who owned the fire. Or he could do the other thing, the thing no one in his world had ever done. He asked Amara what she wanted him to do, and she refused to answer. She told him she would not choose his soul for him. She had come into his life to take something, and she would not leave it having taken the one decision that had to be his alone. But she told him one true thing. She told him she had not fallen for the man who owned the fire. She had fallen for the boy who went through the door. He held her hands, and he understood, finally, that he had never actually been trapped by having no name. A man with no legal existence is also a man with nothing left to inherit. The erasure Cho Man-soo meant as a cage was the only door out that had ever existed. Kang walked into the old guard hall on his own 2 feet and set the folder on the long table. Yoon Seo-jin looked at it and knew, with the instinct of a man who had spent his life reading rooms, exactly what was inside. Kang did not gloat. He simply told the assembled heads the truth about the man asking to lead them, laid the forged lineage out page by page, and let the silence do the work that shouting never could. Then he did the thing that stopped the breath in every powerful chest in that hall. He said he did not want the throne. He was giving it away. He dismantled it in front of them instead of taking it. He told the heads that the man who had held them together was a forger and a killer, and that the man they had all feared for 40 years had built the whole thing on a lie, and that Kang himself, the erased boy, was walking out of it and taking nothing. No throne, no territory, no name. He handed the forged lineage proof to the assembled council and let them tear Yoon Seo-jin apart with it, because there is no mercy in that world for a false heir, and Kang did not need to lift a hand to end the man who had hunted him. He turned his back on the table and walked toward the doors, and toward Amara waiting beyond them. For the first time in 8 years, Kang Tae-oh walked out of a room owning nothing and afraid of no one. Amara was waiting at the end of the corridor, and she watched him come toward her with a lightness in his step she had never seen, a man who had just set down a weight he had carried since he was 18. He reached her, and he took her hand, and he told her it was done. All of it. The empire, the name, the leash. Gone. And they walked out of that building into the gray, ordinary daylight like 2 people who might actually get to have a life. Which is exactly the moment the story turned one last time. Shin Bora called Amara's phone 6 times in 90 seconds. She had gone back through the old accounts one final time, tying off the last loose thread the way she now tied off everything thoroughly and she had found something buried under the forgery machinery that made the blood leave her face. It was not about Yoon Seo-jin. It was about that night, 8 years ago, the night of the fire, the night the whole story rested on. The official record said Cho Man-soo had ordered the attack on Amara's family. Buried in the sealed files, in the old man's own careful hand, was proof that he had not. Cho Man-soo had carried out that night, but he had not ordered it. The order had come from above, even him, from someone the old man had spent the rest of his life both serving and fearing, someone whose name did not appear in any organization chart because they sat above the entire structure, someone who had wanted Amara's family gone for a reason that had nothing to do with the criminal world at all. Cho Man-soo had scarred and erased a disobedient boy that morning not only as punishment, but to bury a witness to whose hand had really given the command, which meant the person who destroyed Amara's family was still alive, still powerful, and had just watched Kang walk away from the only protection either of them had. Amara stopped dead in the middle of the street and read Bora's message twice. Kang saw her face change and reached for her, asking what was wrong, and she could not answer him because the ground she had finally rebuilt her whole life on had just shifted one more time. For 8 years, she had hunted the wrong man. Then she had learned the man she loved had saved her. Then she had watched the man who ordered it fall in a warehouse. And now, standing in the gray daylight of the first free morning of her life, she was learning that the true architect of the worst night of her existence had never even been in the room. She lifted her eyes from the phone and looked at Kang, and she said the 6 words that ended everything and began everything. She said, "It was never the old man. It goes higher." And Kang Tae-oh, who had just given away an empire to be free of all of it, looked at the woman he had chosen over the throne and understood that the two of them were about to walk straight back into the fire together, because some doors, once you have gone through them, will not let you stay out. He took her hand. He did not let go. And that is exactly where I have to leave you. If your heart is pounding, if you need to know who really gave that order, then you already know what to do. Comment the words Part 4 right now, as loud as you can in that box, because the more voices I see, the faster it comes. Do not leave them standing in that street. Tell me to keep going.